Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robertson bringing you an update video for August 2018. First off, sadly, as many of you are already aware either from seeing the announcements on social media or the various comments posted on my YouTube channel, it is painful for me to announce that my old friend and colleague John passed away a few months ago after finally losing his long and arduous battle with cancer. Even though deep down inside we all knew what the final outcome was going to be, and indeed he had taken quite a noticeable step back from his online activities to spend more time with his family shortly before the end, it was still quite a shock when we received the news of his passing back in May. Now, I won't repeat what I've said earlier, as I feel that we, as in everyone who was either friends or worked with John, have already said our goodbyes, thanked everyone for their support, and passed on our heartfelt condolences and well wishes to his family and loved ones. But what I will do is emphasise again that even though it's not going to be the same without him, in fact it's going to be a damn sight more bloody difficult, I am still committed to finishing the Space Engineer series that we started together almost 3 years ago, as I feel that this is something that he would have both have wished, and a story that I feel needs to come to a satisfactory end. Now, please bear in mind that progress in getting the next few episodes of Space Engineers Into the Unknown out to you guys is going to be slow, more so than previously as there are still many unfinished assets we were working on, plus there's still a few mods that are broken since the last major update, and I'm now essentially doing the series alone, which means that while there's going to be no multiplayer related crashes going on whilst I'm recording, I am now missing the best damn Space Master I've ever had the privilege of playing online with, which is definitely going to make things a little more tricky for me, but rest assured I'll get there eventually, even if it means only being able to do one new episode every 3 months or so, but here's hoping it doesn't take quite that long, huh? Now, the good news is that when we first came across the AI bug for Space Engineers back in February, we realised that there was the very real possibility that Cain might take their sweet time in fixing it. That's even if they managed to fix it at all. So John and I actually took the decision to record the final 2 episodes of Season 3 well in advance, as there was no creature AI required in those. So once the planet-side episodes are out of the way, the final 2 should be with you guys pretty quickly, wrapping up Season 3 and indeed the series as a whole. And best of all, it also means, in a roundabout sort of way, that John is actually there in both the very first and last episodes of Into the Unknown, which is pretty damn neat when you think about it, and I think it's something that he would have liked. Speaking of Space Engineers, there's been another major overhaul recently, this time with regards to multiplayer. From what I've seen so far, a lot of the issues that were plaguing people that were trying to play this game online with their friends seem to have been for the most part resolved, or at the very least they've been improved to the extent that the servers can now cope with larger groups of people playing online together without the game glitching out or the sim speed dropping through the floor. Again, it's not 100% perfect yet, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, especially for those of you that have been suffering with the unstable lagfest that Space Engineers multiplayer has become famous for. There's also been some improvements to the performance, which I have to admit I did notice when I was last in game, as both the sim speed and frames per second seemed to be a little faster than before whilst I was in Avalon Colony. And as my viewers have already seen, there's several large structures, all with machines and scripts running, that caused more than a few slowdowns in the last episode. Cain have also included a female character model in the last update, which is good, but not something I'm terribly excited about, as Sectan already modded at least 3 female character models into the game by this time last year. But admittedly, Cain's player character does have a little more detail and uses a whole new set of animations. So, all I'm waiting for now is a Space Engineer's male player character that knows how to use a razor. Another game which I'm taking a look at now that it's in Alpha 8.2 is Empyrion Galactic Survival. This game has seen many changes and improvements since I first took a look at it at around this time last year. Not only have the graphics and shaders been updated, but the planets themselves have seen a massive increase in size. In some cases they're up to 64 times larger than in older versions of the game. And, as a bonus, you can now fly all the way around them and cross over the North and South Poles without any barriers or loading screens, which makes the environment feel a lot more immersive and believable than before. The AI for the native wildlife and Xyrax aliens have also been given a workover, and they now react more realistically to the player's presence, with wild animals either running away or, in the case of the larger or more aggressive ones, making threatening noises and gestures before attacking when you get too close. The Xyrax aliens themselves will now crouch, charge and try to flank the player when encountered in-game. Smaller improvements also include being able to sell items to NPC traders, along with some changes to the food and recipe system to make them more interchangeable, and a Tier 2 repair bay block that not only repairs damaged vehicles, but allows for a repair to template option, which essentially repairs any missing blocks on your ship or hovercraft to a previously saved template, and will ask the player for the resources required for those repairs via a repair console, which, to be honest, is an absolutely amazing feature and one which other similar games out there could certainly benefit from implementing. Given all that, we still need to bear in mind that this game is still very much in alpha, and as a result it's far from perfect. Some of the things I found that personally bugged me, apart from the fantasy resource ores such as Arestrum and Zascosium appearing alongside actual real life ones such as copper, iron, gold, etc., is the fact that even though we've got a motorbike, there's still no wheeled vehicles that the player can actually build from scratch. Instead, the game continues to use hovercraft or ground effect vehicles as the primary mode of surface-based travel, with the player later progressing onto small spacecraft and then the larger capital ships. When it comes to travelling between the planets in the star system, the player will need to research and build something called a warp drive for their vessels. But here's the thing, there's a chance that some of the warp points between the planets will be one way, which can lead to the player essentially being stuck, particularly if you chose to start the scenario with a randomly generated star system. To me, this makes absolutely no sense at all, as you're essentially using a warp drive to jump from planet to planet rather than jump gates or stargates that are linked together, so there really shouldn't be any sort of one-way system in place. Now, I can understand this being used in a multiplayer scenario if there is a starter planet that you only want new players to start on before leaving once they reach a certain stage in their progression, but it's not really something that fits in with single player or co-op, and in my opinion it really should be removed in the default random generation. One of my other gripes is that all the player built and AI capital vessels I've encountered in-game become entities instead of solid blocks once they start moving, which means that players cannot move around their vessels or attempt to board any of the others while they are in motion, unlike space engineers for example, which I suspect is more of an engine limitation or something that the Empyrion development team haven't yet been able to implement successfully. But I feel it would make the game significantly more fun, as at the moment you're not allowed to get out of your ship, even if it's moving or turning just a tiny bit, and if you're not sitting in a cockpit or passenger seat when the ships begin to move, you just fall through it as if it's not even there. The same goes with the enemy capital ships, which annoyingly become dreaded ghost ships or holograms that you can shoot at, but sadly you can't actually touch them and just fly through them when you get too close. Despite all these complaints, I'm finding Empyrion to be a hugely fun experience, and, as many of the SE fanboys who follow my channel will be horrified to hear, I'm actually enjoying it more than Space Engineers now, as while even though there isn't the same level of ship design complexity in physics, which isn't always a bad thing mind you, the game world that Empyrion is set in just feels more alive, and the survival aspect stands head and shoulders above Space Engineers, which means it appeals more to me in that regards. And I feel that in time, once the devs work on the ship collision, AI and backstory, it'll certainly be something that I personally will be looking forward to playing in more detail and possibly even doing a let's play on. But just to clarify, for those of you watching and try to prevent any flame wars from starting on this channel, I enjoy both Space Engineers and Empyrion Galactic Survival, as I feel that both games have their pros and cons, and indeed they cater towards people with just slightly different tastes. If you're looking for a more creative sandbox experience where you can just build some amazing spaceship designs and then test them online with your friends and make your own story and challenges as you go, then I'd say that Space Engineers is the game for you. However, if you're looking for a more immersive survival experience with both enemy and friendly NPCs, where building a base or starship is less complex, and in some cases secondary to the game itself, then I think Empyrion Galactic Survival could definitely be well worth looking at. I know that I myself have been playing it more and more during my spare time recently, and I can safely say I'm really enjoying it. Now, for those of you who may remember, back in October 2016 I took a look at the reviews for a particularly overhyped space exploration and survival game called No Man's Sky by Sean Murray and his company Hello Games. Based on what I'd seen, I decided to hold off on buying it back then, as it very much appeared as though the game was released as a buggy mess and it fell well short of what was actually promised. You'll also remember that I mentioned during my update video from that time that I said that if Sean Murray and Hello Games continued to work on No Man's Sky, fix the outstanding issues and flesh it out some more, then I would take a look at it at some point in the future. And guess what? They did, and I have. As luck would have it, I spotted No Man's Sky in the Steam sale for $19.99, and after watching the recent videos posted by both Spange and Mac from the Worth a Buy channel regarding how the game had changed, I decided to give it a try for myself and see what I thought. And I can safely say that despite my initial reservations, I'm actually quite impressed with what they've done. Now, before I continue, I'd just like to say that No Man's Sky is a very different beast from games like Space Engineers, Empyrion or even Elite Dangerous, as it's not so much focused on the building, fighting, trading or survival aspects, though it still has them to some extent. This game is mainly about exploring, following the storylines, getting immersed in the lore, chilling out and generally just messing around in the huge procedurally generated universe that the game has to offer. And since the No Man's Sky Next update, the game now has multiplayer, so you can now do all the above but in co-op with your friends, which makes for an even more fun experience. Now, while this doesn't excuse what Hello Games did by releasing the initial game in such a sorry state, you do have to give them credit for sticking with it all this time, fixing the issues and updating the game at no extra cost via a series of patches, and finally making a game that's as close to Sean Murray's original vision as possible, when they could just have easily left the game in an unplayable state, taken the money and run, which sadly many developers in the past have done so, as many former Starforge players will be all too painfully familiar with. Now, I'm someone who doesn't mind giving people a second chance if they prove they're willing to work for it and make amends, and in this instance it certainly appears to be the case. And I, for one, am enjoying my occasional jaunts into the universe of No Man's Sky. But just like with Empyrion, it still needs some work, but so far it's definitely worth getting, especially if you guys ever see it on sale again either on Steam or GOG. In other news, Arma 3 has seen the release of another large patch, this time aptly named the Encore Update, which adds 2 new SAM and radar systems, anti-radiation missiles, and small diameter guided bombs. But best of all, it adds the USS Liberty, which is a large, static, placeable destroyer-class warship, with one of the most detailed interiors I've seen yet in Arma 3. The Liberty also gives the player access to some very impressive naval fire support and the option to launch and recover both helicopters and smaller surface vessels, like the RHIB. I've only taken a quick look at this one, but I'm sure it's going to provide mission makers with some cool new options, as well as providing players with a much more manageable alternative starting location or forward base than the USS Freedom, which was the massive aircraft carrier that came with the Jets DLC. Again, I'm looking forward to seeing what exciting missions my colleagues can come up with using these exciting new assets for the game. And finally, after a countdown on the Ark Survival Evolved's Twitch channel reached 0, a trailer for the next Ark expansion was announced, named Ark Extinction. As many of you out there already suspected, this next expansion will take place on Earth, but it's not any kind of Earth we recognise, as it's now an element-infested, ravaged world filled with fantastical creatures, both organic and technological. Not too much is known at this stage, other than a working release date of November the 6th, and that players will not only be facing tech and aberration versions of the familiar dinos, but there will also be several giant mini-bosses known as Titans that roam across sections of the map accessible through dungeons or caves. These promise to be a significant challenge to defeat, but there's also been mention that they have the potential to be tamed. Tamed? Good grief, I wouldn't like to see something like that being used to raid my base, that's for sure. Anyway, I guess we'll know more nearer the time, as details on this new expansion are still very sketchy at this stage, but given the lore we've seen so far, along with the hints that were dropped by the devs, I strongly suspect that this may be the final DLC for Ark, or at least it sounds like it could be the last of the large official DLC packs being released, as I'm assuming they'll now be looking to move on to either Ark 2 or new IP. Well, that about wraps things up with regards to the games I've been playing or following online, which means it's now time for this episode's Q&A segment. The first question comes from J. Ortiz, who asks, have you seen the footage of Dual Universe, and if you have, what do you think? And my answer to that is yes, I have actually seen a few videos regarding this particular game recently, and it does look very interesting indeed. But saying that, I'm not a huge fan of how most of the game's mechanics are based around using a quasi-magical tech glove in your hand rather than actual tools or devices. Nor am I really sold on its focus on being a largely multiplayer and community-driven game. After playing games like Empyrion more recently, I'm starting to see how much more fun, for me personally at least, survival sandbox games can be that are set in a living, breathing universe with actual NPCs and enemies, where the resource gathering and ship or base construction aspects are used to complement the game rather than serve as its main focus. Bear in mind that it's still early days, and as with Sky Wanderers, I'll be watching the development of this one closely and see how it takes shape as an actual game. The next question comes from Josh McNabb, who asks, do you plan on making another Space Engineers series after Into the Unknown? Hi Josh, unfortunately not. The Space Engineers Into the Unknown series was something that John and I started together a few years back, and wasn't something that we'd initially planned to have running for any more than 1 or 2 seasons. It's already a struggle for me to carry on with it now that he's passed away, and it's not just because of the extra workload of not having a Space Master to manipulate the environment, but I'm feeling his absence a great deal whilst I'm recording the in-game footage. I dare say there's fewer bugs and a lot less in the way of unexpected crashes going on in single player, but it's just not the same anymore. The main thing that's keeping me going is the desire to finish what we started and bring a satisfactory conclusion to the epic story that we started together back in October 2015. Combined with the fact that Space Engineers is getting a little long in the tooth now and isn't really something I play much of during my own free time, well, other than to muck about with other people's workshop creations of course, means that I'll be looking to move on from that game fairly soon anyway. Which, when you think about it, is probably for the best, as unlike some other YouTubers out there, who shall remain nameless, I don't want to focus too much on any one particular game for too long, otherwise, like them, I run the real risk of turning into a one-trick pony, and end up with having the majority of my subscribers and viewer base being fanboys of that one game, who have a horrible tendency to post hostile and sometimes downright abusive comments towards anyone or anything that isn't, which isn't an ideal situation for any content creator to be in. Being able to diversify is always a good thing, even if it is within the same genre. The next question once again comes from The Thing, with 2 eyes. That's correct, ladies and gentlemen, I will accept more than one question from one of my viewers or subscribers, providing enough time has elapsed since the last one. Anyway, The Thing asks, what universe would you like to see the next great sandbox survival game or big screen movie set in? Oh, now this is a tough one, and a good question. Personally, I'd say it's a tie between George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire, which most of you know as the Game of Thrones universe, or if we're going down the sci-fi route, it would have to be the Expanse universe by Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, under the pseudonym of James S.A. Corey. Personally, I feel that both of those settings would make for an amazing experience, as they're both relatively low fantasy, have a huge amount of lore, and an incredible amount of detail and depth put into their respective worlds, which makes for a far more immersive and enjoyable experience in my opinion, especially if it's set in a relatively open world game. Likewise, a movie in each of those universes would be really good, but unfortunately, as with most big screen movies, it's over way too quickly. The next question comes from Xylos17, who asks, who is your favourite YouTuber and why? Now, that tends to change as the years go by, but right now I'd have to say that it's the legend that is Scott Manley. The reason why is because I'm a big follower of anything related to the space industry and of space sims and hard sci-fi shows in general, and Scott Manley does an amazing job of producing content which covers almost all of the above, so kudos to him and all the hard work he puts into that. A close second would be Fraser Cain for the very same reasons. For those of you who are unfamiliar with their work, fear not, as I'll add a link to their channels in the description below. The next question comes from none other than Commander Shepard. Hey, I loved you in the Mass Effect trilogy by the way, who asks, what's with all the sci-fi and TV show references in your Space Engineer series? Yeah, all those references in Into the Unknown started as a sort of in-joke between John and myself, as we wanted to include as many as possible throughout the first season and see if any of the viewers actually spotted them. It was part of the fun we were having when we were recording each episode, and eventually it ended up being something we just kept on going with, and in a way it became an integral part of the series itself. The next question comes from RageQuit, who asks, what do you think about the multiplayer overhaul? I'm going to assume you're referring to the recent Space Engineers multiplayer overhaul, and if that's the case then I've kind of already answered that, but just to clarify, then I personally think that it's a welcome improvement to the game and is great for large groups of people that play online together. But I don't really play Space Engineers for the multiplayer aspect, and even if I do play online, it's usually only with a small group of friends. The changes don't really affect me that much. Although I have noticed, as I mentioned earlier, a slight performance increase, which is always welcome. There was something of a hint that there might be work done to improve the survival side of things, and that would definitely be a welcome addition, as that particular part of the game always felt lacking. But it's understandable, as I believe the developers originally intended Space Engineers to be all about content creation with some resource gathering tacked on, rather than an actual survival game. The next question comes from Marie Dalton, who asks, any more news on the Minecraft series? Unfortunately, with regards to the Terra Firma Punk series, as John was responsible for writing the background story for it and for editing the custom NPCs, it's probably safe to assume it's on hold indefinitely now. If I ever do start another Minecraft series again, it'll most likely be a fresh one, using another mod pack, and will be in a slightly different format from the last one. I apologise if that wasn't the answer you wanted to hear, but sadly that's just the truth of it. And the final question in tonight's Q&A segment comes from Dust Bowl Gaming, who asks, can you recommend any games for me to play while I wait for Mount and Blade Bannerlord to be released? And the answer to that is, no, go away, leave me alone. Just kidding. I can thoroughly recommend Kingdom Come Deliverance if you've not played it already. While it's not quite an open-world sandbox game where you lead an army besieging castles and conquering towns, it's still got a really strong medieval open-world vibe to it, and the sheer amount of detail that Warhorse Studios have put into the game is absolutely staggering. Apart from a few bugs I came across, the only real complaint I've got about Kingdom Come Deliverance is that the ending to the main storyline is a little anticlimactic, and there's almost no mounted opponents in the game. There's only a handful of guys I've seen on horseback, and most of them seem to be due to scripted events. All the random encounters I've come across seem to be guys that were all on foot, which seems a little odd considering the name of the company that made the game is Warhorse Studios. Overall, I found the game to be an extremely enjoyable diversion, and I can wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone that enjoys that sort of thing. Just remember that this isn't Skyrim. Kingdom Come is set in Bohemia in the early 1400s and aims to be as historically accurate as possible. So don't play the game expecting there to be any wizards casting bolts of lightning at you or fire-breathing dragons flying around. Well, not until the modding tools get released, that is. Another potential candidate is a game called Freeman Guerrilla Warfare, which looks like a modern-day version of Mount and Blade, where you lead a squad of hired guns around doing almost all the things you do in a Mount and Blade game, but with assault rifles and hand grenades instead. Hey, once they include vehicles, maybe they could change the name of the game to something like Jeep and Gun or Tank and Cannon. Anyway, I've not actually played that game, but if you want to see actual footage of someone playing it, then I know that the Reformist has posted a few Let's Play videos that you can watch to see if it might be something that's of interest to you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much concludes this session's Q&A segment, and indeed tonight's channel update video. Once again, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all my viewers and express a heartfelt thanks to all my incredible subscribers out there, as all your support over the last few years has been simply amazing and is one of the reasons why I continue to produce content on this channel, and hopefully shall continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you all again soon, and as always, this is Robertson, signing off.